A young couple vanished in Alaska. Months later, a ranger found their boot growing out of a barrel of mushrooms. Liam and Chloe were the quintessential adventurous couple. Young, full of life, and with a shared love for the great outdoors. They had decided to spend their summer hiking in the wild and untamed beauty of Alaska. Their Instagram was a vibrant chronicle of their journey. Sun-drenched selfies on mountain peaks, misty shots of pristine lakes, and videos of them laughing as they pitched their tent under the vast Alaskan sky. Their last post was a photo of them at the trailhead, their backpacks looking new and their smiles full of anticipation. "Ready for our biggest adventure yet," the caption read. They were embarking on a multi-day trek into a more remote part of the national park, an area known for its breathtaking but challenging terrain. 9 months later, the smiles in that photo felt like a distant memory. The post, once a beacon of their excitement, was now a digital memorial, filled with comments from worried family and friends. A massive search and rescue operation had been launched after they failed to check in at their designated time. But the vastness of the Alaskan wilderness had swallowed all trace of them. Their trail went cold, and eventually the search was called off. Their loved ones were left with a heavy, heartbreaking silence. Ranger Elias Thorne was an old-timer, a man who had dedicated his life to protecting the very land that had claimed so many. He knew every trail, every secret cave, and every hidden creek in the park. He was on a routine patrol, checking for signs of illegal activity, when he noticed something out of place. Tucked away behind a thick cluster of spruce trees, partially hidden by overgrown ferns, was a bright blue barrel. It was the kind used for storing supplies. But this one looked strangely out of place. He approached with caution. The air around the barrel had a peculiar, earthy smell, not unlike the scent of wet soil and decay. As he got closer, his heart began to pound with a sense of dread. He had learned to trust over his many years in the wilderness. He saw something strange spilling out of the barrel's side. A pale, almost unnatural growth. It looked like a field of giant, fleshy mushrooms, a type he had never seen before. They grew in a dense, almost suffocating cluster, as if bursting forth from the earth itself. The sight was unsettling, but it was what he saw within the jumble of fungi that made him freeze. Tucked amongst the pale gilled caps was a hiking boot. A single muddy, worn-out hiking boot, still attached to the leg of a human being. The rest of the body was obscured by the strange, sprawling mushrooms that seemed to have consumed everything in their path. The boot was a brand he recognized, a popular model, the very one he had been told Liam and Chloe were wearing. Elias felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The silence of the forest was suddenly deafening. The discovery sent shockwaves through the small community. Forensic teams were brought in, their expressions a mix of grim determination and bewildered fascination. The barrel was a makeshift biohazard, and the mushrooms were unlike anything they had ever encountered. They weren't a known species. They seemed to have grown at an impossible rate, consuming the organic matter around them with a voracious hunger. The DNA tests confirmed the unthinkable. The remains belonged to Liam and Chloe. The strange fungus, now a subject of intense scientific study, had seemingly sprouted from their bodies, feeding on their flesh and bone. Their clothes, their backpacks, even their cell phones were gone, seemingly absorbed by the fungal growth. It was a macabre, nightmarish scene. But the real mystery remained. How did they end up in that barrel? There were no signs of a struggle, no wounds, no indication of a bear attack or a fall. It was as if they had simply laid down and allowed themselves to be consumed. The official report was inconclusive, a haunting question mark left hanging over a tragedy. Ranger Elias, however, couldn't let it go. He was haunted by the image of the mushrooms, and he couldn't shake the feeling that the barrel wasn't just a container for a gruesome end, but the key to a more sinister beginning. He knew that the wilderness, as beautiful as it was, held its own dark and terrifying secrets, and he was determined to uncover the truth. Before the forest's hungry, silent embrace claimed another victim. Elias found himself drawn back to the site. The area had been cordoned off, but his years of experience allowed him to slip past the official boundaries unnoticed. The strange mushrooms had been removed for study, but the ground was still a disturbed patch of earth, a scar on the forest floor. He walked around the perimeter, his eyes scanning for anything the forensic team might have missed. That's when he saw it, carved crudely into the bark of a nearby birch tree. Just above the reach of the fungi were two symbols. The first was a stylized mushroom, not unlike the ones that had consumed the couple. The second was an arrow, pointing deeper into the woods, toward an area known as the Whispering Caves. Elias felt a surge of cold. Dread mixed with a burning curiosity. This wasn't a natural death. It was a message. He packed a bag with supplies and his trusty sidearm and headed into the caves, an area rumored to be a sacred site for an old, forgotten cult. The caves were a labyrinth of winding passages, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something else. A faint, sweet scent like overripe fruit. Deeper inside, he found a small, hidden chamber. The walls were covered in intricate, spiraling carvings, all depicting the same mushroom symbol he had seen on the tree. In the center of the chamber was a shallow pool of water, its surface shimmering with an iridescent sheen. As he knelt down to examine the water, he heard it. A faint, almost imperceptible sound, like a whisper carried on the wind. It was coming from the walls themselves, a chorus of voices speaking in a language he didn't recognize. But the tone was hypnotic, soothing. He felt a powerful, almost overwhelming sense of peace and a desire to lie down, to close his eyes, to let the whispers wash over him. His mind felt hazy, and his thoughts became slow and fragmented. He forced himself to stand up, shaking his head to clear the fog. He knew what this was. He had read old ranger lore about the caves, tales of a hallucinogenic fungus that grew in the dark and released its spores into the air, causing a state of euphoric submission. The cult had used it to lure people to their god, the strange mushroom they revered. Elias realized, with a sickening jolt, what had happened to Liam and Chloe. They hadn't been murdered in the traditional sense. They had been seduced, their minds clouded by the fungal spores until they willingly climbed into the barrel, a final act of devotion to a silent, growing entity. Elias knew he couldn't stay. He had to get out, had to warn the authorities. But as he turned to leave, a shadow detached itself from the wall of the cave. It was a man, thin and gaunt, his eyes wide and vacant. His clothes were ragged, and his skin was pale, almost translucent. He carried a small, leather-bound book, and his lips were moving, whispering the same hypnotic chant that was emanating from the walls. It was the cult's last remaining acolyte, the guardian of the chamber. The acolyte didn't seem to see Elias, his gaze fixed on some unseen point in the distance. He walked slowly toward the pool, and with a silent, graceful motion, he knelt down and dipped his hands into the iridescent water. When he brought them out, they were covered in a film of the same strange fungal spores, glistening like dew. He turned and offered them to Elias, his lips still whispering the chant. Elias felt a terrible pressure in his chest, a battle between his will to survive and the powerful, intoxicating pull of the spores. He raised his gun, but his hand trembled. He couldn't shoot. The man wasn't a threat, not in the way he understood. He was a host, a vessel for the strange entity that had consumed Liam and Chloe. The acolyte took a step closer, his eyes pleading, inviting. "Join us," he whispered in a voice that was no longer his own. "Become one with the host. It hungers. It needs. Join us." Elias knew he had to make a choice. Succumb to the whispers and become another silent victim, or fight for his life against an enemy that wasn't a man, but an idea, a fungus, a hungry god hidden in the darkness. The fate of the couple and the very soul of the wilderness hung in the balance. He aimed his gun, not at the man, but at the pool of glowing water, and pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the caves, a sound of defiance against the insidious, beautiful silence. He had to stop the host, and to do that, he had to destroy its sacred source before its beautiful, terrifying influence spread to the outside world. The bullet shattered the stillness of the chamber, not with a simple splash, but with a crackling, sickening sound. The iridescent water in the pool glowed brighter for a moment, then seemed to curdle, turning a murky, viscous black. The strange, sweet smell turned acrid, like rotting leaves and chemicals. The acolyte froze, his vacant eyes widening in a fleeting moment of what looked like terror. Or perhaps grief. The whispering from the walls ceased, replaced by a low, humming vibration that seemed to shake the very foundations of the caves. The acolyte's body began to convulse, his skin turning a mottled gray, and his limbs twisting into unnatural angles. He wasn't a man anymore. He was a puppet, and his strings had just been cut. He fell to the ground with a wet thump, and in the low light of Elias's headlamp, Elias saw something horrifying. A network of pale, thread-like filaments, like tiny fungal roots, began to push their way out of his skin, weaving and braiding around each other, as if searching for something to latch onto. The man wasn't just a host, he was a part of the fungus. And with its source of nourishment gone, he was dying a grotesque, accelerated death. Elias backed away, his stomach churning. He understood now. The cult hadn't just used the fungus. They had become it. They were a collective consciousness, their bodies a fertile ground for the parasitic entity. The host wasn't a single being, but the entire network of the fungus, a silent, hungry god that spread its spores and consumed those who came to worship it. Liam and Chloe hadn't just been victims, they had been offerings. Their youthful bodies a fresh meal for the ancient, subterranean rot. He turned and fled the cave. The memory of the acolyte's final, silent horror burned into his mind. He couldn't just report what he had seen. He had to prove it. He had to expose the root of this rot, this silent killer that lived beneath the beautiful Alaskan landscape. Elias returned to the ranger station, his face grim, his hands still trembling from the encounter. He went to his old files, digging through reports on the missing couple and other unsolved disappearances over the decades. He found a pattern, a trail of breadcrumbs he had never noticed before. All the missing persons cases he had marked as lost to the wilderness were concentrated in the same area, a circular radius around the Whispering Caves. Some of the older reports even mentioned a faint, sweet smell and strange, unsettling sounds. He put in a call to the head of the park rangers, a man named Henderson, a bureaucrat who had always dismissed Elias's old-timer theories as folk tales. This time, Elias was direct, his voice urgent and authoritative. Henderson, you need to bring in a hazmat team and a bioforensics unit. I've found what killed the couple. It's a fungus. It's alive, it's sentient, and it's spreading. Henderson was skeptical, but the tone in Elias's voice, the raw conviction, was something he couldn't ignore. He agreed to send a team to the caves under the pretense of a geological survey. The team, equipped with hermetically sealed suits and sophisticated sensors, entered the caves and found exactly what Elias had described. The black dead water in the pool, the skeletal remains of the acolyte, now completely covered in the pale, root-like fungi, and the spiraling carvings on the wall. The sensors detected a high concentration of hallucinogenic spores in the air, confirming Elias's theory. The team, however, was hesitant to go further. This was an unprecedented biological threat, something they weren't trained for. The news broke quietly at first. A small blurb in a local paper about a unique biological finding in the national park. But it was only a matter of time before the truth came out. Scientists descended upon the caves, their awe and fear palpable. They named the new species Mycelium devorans, the devouring mushroom. Its existence defied all known biological principles. It was a single, vast organism, with a rudimentary form of a hive mind, and it had been quietly feeding on lost souls for decades. The park was closed indefinitely. The area around the caves was sealed off and designated as a biohazard zone. A massive and difficult operation began to neutralize the fungus. But the scientists were unsure if it was even possible. The mycelial network extended deep into the earth, its tendrils reaching far beyond the caves. An unknown and unquantifiable threat. Elias became a reluctant hero, his old-timer wisdom finally vindicated. But he felt no triumph. He had faced a monster, not with claws and teeth, but with a silent, beautiful, and insidious whisper. He would always be haunted by the image of Liam and Chloe, their joyful smiles in that last photo, and the gruesome sight of them being consumed by a god. That was nothing more than a hungry rot. The story was over, but the fear remained. The park, once a symbol of wild, untamed beauty, was now also a place of dread. It was a reminder that in the vastness of the wilderness, there were some secrets that were better left undisturbed. Some evils that were so ancient and quiet, you wouldn't know they were there until you were already a part of them. The whisper was gone for now, but Elias knew deep down that the host was not dead. It was simply waiting, and in the silence of the woods, the rot was still growing. Weeks turned into months. The official story became a scientific anomaly, a biological oddity buried in countless research papers. The media circus moved on, and the world, with its short attention span, began to forget the devouring mushroom. See, but for Elias, the story was far from over. He had retired from the park service, but he still lived in a cabin not far from the now sealed-off area. The air felt different now, heavy and silent, as if holding its breath. One evening, as a cold rain fell, and the wind howled through the trees, Elias was sitting by the fire, poring over the ancient ranger lore again. He had always believed in the power of the land, But now he understood its insidious capacity for malice. He was looking at a map, a hand-drawn relic passed down for generations of rangers, when he noticed a small, almost imperceptible symbol near the caves. It was a circle with a dot in the middle, a sign for a water source. But this one was different. It had two short lines extending from the bottom, like legs. It was a stylized figure, a person, and next to it was the same mushroom symbol. He felt a chill run down his spine. The acolyte had not been the last. There had to be more hosts, more acolytes who had escaped the caves, their bodies already a part of the fungal network. The whisper wasn't gone. It was simply a different kind of silent. It was hiding, waiting. He packed a bag, this time with a grim purpose. He wasn't going to fight a monster with a gun. He was going to expose the living roots of the rot. He knew where the old logging roads were, the ones that went deep into the forest and were now overgrown and forgotten. It was a long shot, but he had a hunch. He felt the pull of the wilderness. Not a peaceful embrace this time, but a tug of war against an enemy he couldn't see. He drove his old truck as far as it would go, then continued on foot. The rain had turned the ground into a muddy morass, and the trees loomed like dark sentinels in the heavy fog. The forest was eerily quiet. He found what he was looking for in a small, remote clearing, an area that had once been a logging camp. There, amidst the rusted husks of old machinery, were dozens of the same blue barrels, neatly arranged in rows, and from each one, the pale, grotesque mushrooms were spilling out, their tendrils stretching across the ground like a carpet of death. He saw them then, not the hosts, but the victims. They were walking, dozens of people, their eyes glassy and vacant, their movements slow and uncoordinated, all heading toward the barrels. There were hikers who had gone missing in the last year, a couple who had been on a fishing trip, a teenager who had run away from home. They were drawn by the same hypnotic pull, walking to their final resting place, their bodies ready to become part of the great host. And leading them, his face pale and his movements slow, was Ranger Henderson. Henderson looked at Elias, a faint smile on his lips. "You found it," he said, his voice a distorted echo. A whisper that was both his and something else. "The gift. The peace. We feed the host, and the host feeds us. It's a perfect cycle." Elias realized the true horror. The fungus was sentient. It had learned. It no longer needed to lure its victims with spores in a single cave. It was using its hosts to spread its influence, to create new feeding grounds, to take over the land one soul at a time. Henderson, the bureaucrat who had dismissed his stories, had been a vessel all along. Elias, with a heavy heart, raised his camera and took a photo. He knew what he had to do. The world wouldn't believe his story, not without proof. He had to show them the real enemy. He couldn't fight them all, not alone. He had to run, to get the photo to the authorities, to expose the silent, beautiful horror before it was too late. The last he saw of Henderson and the other hosts was a single, unified wave, a slow, unstoppable tide of flesh and fungi, all turning toward him, their eyes empty, but their smiles full of a terrifying, welcoming peace. He ran, the click of his camera the only sound in the otherwise dead silence. He had faced the wilderness, and in the end, it was the wilderness that had won. The story of the lost couple was just the beginning. The real story was just starting to grow. A silent, beautiful rot spreading beneath the soil, its roots reaching out, waiting to consume the world.